Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start in just a couple of minutes. We're waiting for Carlos Manuel Rodriguez to come and join us for another event in just a little bit. So be patient. We have some of our panelists here, but we'll have another one joining soon. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rio Conventions Pavilion, a joint collaborative outreach project of the UNFCCC, the UNCCD, and the Convention on Biological Diversity, also in collaboration with the Global Environment Facility. The Rio Conventions Pavilion is a program of activities that has been going on since 2010. We hold events in the major COPs of all three of the so-called Rio Conventions. I'd first of all like to say that we're very, very pleased that we're here in the GCF-GEF Pavilion being hosted. As you'll find out over the course of our event today, the GCF and the GEF are very important partners for everything done under all three conventions. My name is David Ainsworth, and I'm the head of communications for the Convention on Biological Diversity, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Today you have the wonderful opportunity to hear from all three conventions, and you're going to hear from also actors and ministers who have been the presidents of these different conventions and who've been involved in the negotiations and the implementation of the Climate Change Convention, the Desertification Convention, and the Biodiversity Convention. We will also be joined soon by Manuel, the CEO and head of the Global Environment Facility, and also Environment Minister Yasmine Fouad will come and join us as well. So a little bit on today's event. The title of the event that you see on the screen is Restoring Balance with Nature for a Sustainable Future. As you'll hear from our speakers today, the state of the planet we have now is one where we're not in balance with nature. The statistics are very, very clear. We see an extreme rise in greenhouse gases with corresponding effects on all systems of the planet. We're seeing accelerated biodiversity loss that's leading to a decline not just in species numbers, but in the actual function of ecosystems upon which we human beings rely for our well-being. And we're seeing the continued degradation of land that leads to food security, climate issues, and human suffering in the form of mass migrations as well. These are three challenges that each of these conventions deal with. The United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. These three conventions, created in 1992, so we're looking at almost 30 years ago now, were meant to deal with these challenges. Over these decades, we've come to realize that this implementation needs to be done in a coordinated fashion. We need to look at synergies. We need to look at the ways that these conventions not only develop policy at the global level, but how are they implemented at national levels. The actors that work in each of these conventions, the national focal points, the designated authorities, do they speak with each other? How can they be better coordinated to work and move forward on these three different agendas? These are the questions we'll deal with today's panel. One more quick thing is this year, 2022, has been a remarkable year for talking about the work of all these conventions together. This year, we have seen the meetings of the conferences of the parties for all three. We started the year with COP15 for the UNCCD in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, where we moved forward on the land degradation agenda. We also had an opportunity at the Stockholm Plus 50 Summit where we brought together a lot of these other actors again to talk about what the legacy was or the meaning of these conventions were in the broad environmental movement of the last 50 years. We're here now at COP27 where we're seeing an incredible narrative now emerging about the importance of bringing together nature, protection of land, and also climate change. And then in just a few weeks, we'll be sending people to Montreal where we'll talk about setting a new global biodiversity framework. So these are the comments and questions that we'll be dealing with in today's panel. Let me introduce the panelists who are on stage now, and I'll have to introduce the other ones who will come along a little bit later because they've all got a very, very packed schedule here. So with me to my immediate left is Mr. Ibrahim Thiaw, who is Executive Secretary of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Beside him is His Excellency Mr. Alain-Richard Donwahi, who is the President of UNCCD's COP15. And we're very lucky to have Her Excellency Teresa Ribera, the Deputy Prime Minister for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge of Spain. Today we'll be getting some short remarks from everybody, and then, time permitting, we'll have some discussion amongst the panelists and from the audience. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor now to Ibrahim Thiaw, where he can open up and provide us the opening narrative for our event today. Mr. Thiaw.
Thank you very much, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Excellency, Mr. President, Excellency Minister, members of parliament. We have two MPs with us here from Côte d'Ivoire. Bonjour à tout le monde. David said it all, but I'll add a few words. Congratulations. Today, we are 8 billion people on Earth. Really, congratulations. It's a milestone. It's a historic day. We have never been as many people on this planet as today. So this needs to be celebrated. At the same time, this planet has never been as sick as it is today. And one of the reasons why the planet is sick is because of the people that we are. So the question is, how can we feed a growing population, a growing middle class? 8 billion today, 9 billion probably before 2050. And these people need to be fed, no doubt about it. There's no question that people should be fed, should have decent clothes, and should have decent life. But given the climate change situation, given the biodiversity loss and land degradation that we are living in, and that we know, the question is, how do we reconcile a growing need that needs to be respected with a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, reduction of biodiversity loss, and reduction of degraded land? How do we reconcile this? This is really the question that comes at the heart of the Rio Pavilion Convention and the synergies that we are talking about. So it's not only about institutional issues, it's about the peoples of the planet. And how can we respond to their needs without further depleting the environment, further degrading our forests, our water resources, our land, our biodiversity, and emitting more carbon which is creating all the challenges that we are faced with today in this COP. So we have a COP. We had a COP in Abidjan. We are here in Sharm el-Sheikh. In the next 3 weeks, we will be in Montreal, and then we will move to a following year, and then we will have other series of COPs. But are we making a difference? Are we making the change that is needed? Is that reflected in our national plans? We have NDCs, biodiversity plans, land degradation plans. Are we talking to each other? Do we have a forum at the national level where climate, national focal points, biodiversity, land degradation, chemicals, water, do they have a forum where they would meet and exchange notes? Or are we preparing our plans based on what we think is the best without necessarily knowing what the next plan is? Are we as international organizations responding to the needs of our ministers, which do not necessarily wish to have 8 reports on their table coming from different organizations, but would like to have one report that makes sense to them? So when we talk about synergies between conventions, it is really the integrated approach that is needed, the only one that would work, because as we have always said, you cannot resolve the biodiversity crisis on Monday, wait until Tuesday before you do climate, and only Wednesday think about desertification. There will be no Wednesday. If you are lucky, there will be a Tuesday. Because the climate, the planet is being depleted at a very alarming rate. What are the tools that we have at our disposal to fill that gap, to build bridges? One such tool is actually the GEF and the GCF. Financial institutions need to incentivize a more integrated approach, need to incentivize a more coherent planning system, more consistent, more coherent plans that talk to each other, that make sense at the national level, and that would speak to the world, presenting a country as a country that has a coherent plan. So we have financial institutions. regardless of the acronym or the name or the mandate, they all aim at protecting the planet. Are we putting these capacities and resources together to help national focal points that are in need build more consistent plans? Where are the MDBs as part of the financial systems of ours that are also meant to contribute to a more coherent plan? Where are the decisions from our own governments that would present their country with a face that is coherent and readable? One report dealing with biodiversity, climate, land degradation, you name it, oceans, would make sense because it is one country, because it is one nation. It may be through three or four different ministries, but it's one government. So are we also making that effort of having a more coherent approach? And then COPs. We are here in a climate COP, but in a climate COP, like in a biodiversity COP next month, you will not only talk about biodiversity in silo. You will have climate, you will have land degradation, and so forth. So are COPs ready to actually take that turn, maybe use a language that would make sense to the world? Is the biodiversity COP going to help us adopt some decisions within their own global biodiversity framework that would make sense? Is the UNCCD COP ready to adopt decisions that would resonate with what the biodiversity COP is saying and the climate COP similarly? So in a way, the synergy that we are talking about will have to be reflected, one, at the national level. It starts at the national level because these are sovereign states. And if we are more coherent at the national level, then maybe take it at the regional level. But because again, we have shared resources and no country can be working in isolation. And then take these to global level at the COPs to make our COPs even more coherent and consistent. I can speak for longer, but I understand, David, you gave me a few minutes just to highlight and rather to provoke. And I think I will stop here. Just to sum up, 8 billion people today. I'm privileged to have witnessed 7 and 8. And 9 is coming soon. Very soon, much sooner than we think. And again, there is no question that people should go bed, no one should go to bed hungry. They need to be fed. Yes, we can. Yes, we can improve the productivity in the land. Yes, we can reduce the water consumption of ours. Yes, we can rationalize the use of electricity and energy. Yes, we can reduce the food loss and the food waste that we have in the world. Yes, we can feed everybody without further depleting on our planet, but only if we adopt a strong global biodiversity framework in Montreal next month. We have 1 billion hectares of land to be restored. These are commitments made by governments. We go real, not commitments, we move to action. Third, we agreed in Paris that we will go to 1.5 degrees. Today we are 2.4. We are not yet an abatement of emissions that will take us to a net zero. So we can, but if some conditions are met. And it's up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibrahim. Thank you. Thank you for reminding us that we are living on a crowded planet, but this is a planet where everyone needs to needs to go to bed without being hungry, and that we need to do this in a way that's going to allow this ecosystem that we have to continue to generate. And also thank you for the really provocative questions about what do we need to do at the national level to make sure that we're doing this in a coordinated fashion. So let's keep those remarks in mind as we move on. The next speaker is someone I'm so glad he just managed to join us just now, Carlos Manuel Rodriguez, who, thank you, Carlos, for hosting the Rio Conventions Pavilion here in the GEF-GCF Pavilion. So Carlos Manuel Rodriguez is going to have some remarks about the way that the GEF is working across all of these different areas of climate change, biodiversity, and land degradation. So Carlos Manuel, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave, and hi to my dear friends. I know that I'm a little bit older than Ibrahim. That is why I not only saw the 7 and the 8, I also saw the third. I was born in 1960. There were less than 3 billion people in the planet. So I saw the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and the eighth. And all of them have the right to live the same way that we all live. And unfortunately, that is one of our biggest challenges. Today, this situation forced us to be more comprehensive in the way that we invest in sustainable development. Synergies are extremely important, but this is just one side of the coin. Synergies. Synergies look for maximizing and optimizing resources, but on the other side of the coin, we need political coherence. Because today, the GEF can be, I don't know, 10 times, 100 times bigger than what it is today, that won't be enough money if we keep on investing in economic sectors and activities that continues to degrade the land, to destroy nature, and to pollute the atmosphere. So when we talk about synergies, let's also bring these other elements of political coherence. Because at the end of the day, all of us in our countries, within our governments, and also the private sector, we invest many more time, financial and economic resources in activities that contribute to climate change and loss of biodiversity than what we invest to revert that tendency. The numbers are very clear. Today, all countries, without any exception, within developing and developed nations, invest 144 times more financial resources in activities that destroy forests than what we invest in forest conservation. So it's not just an effort of bringing the Green Climate Fund and the GEF together to complement with a long-term vision, and we welcome everybody here to our pavilion. It's a matter of political coherence. This is where we need to understand those challenges. At the GEF, as we went through the 8th replenishment just early this year, and I want to publicly thank everybody for their support to the GEF replenishment. We did a record-setting replenishment of $5.3 billion. And that sounds a lot of money. But if you divide that into 163 nations with ambitions and BSAPs and NDCs, there is not enough resources. So what we have in mind is that even though we recognize that $5.3 billion is just a drop of water in the ocean, that drop can be extremely powerful if we know where we're heading. And this is the challenge for us at the GEF. Where are we heading? We are heading not just in an effort to create synergies within the multilateral and bilateral investment, also within national expenditures and investment, but most importantly, in bringing together these elements of policy coherence, whereby we can really, once and for all, begin to address the issues of perverse incentives, subsidies, and negative policies that continues to contribute to the degradation of the planet. A couple of weeks ago, we all recognized that oil and gas is taking to the limits and the capacities of this planet to sustain life. Nevertheless, a couple of weeks ago, we saw financial reports indicating that the oil and gas industry has had the biggest profits in the history. So we got a big, big challenge in front of us. This big challenge is not just because there's a huge market failure that is unable to recognize those negative and positive externalities, but at the same time, we have a big political challenge associated to what I call the institutional failure. We tend to believe that we will do progress in the climate, CBD, and land degradation conventions with the same institutional framework that in first place has created the problem that we want to solve today. We operate and work at the government level on silos. I used to be a Minister of Environment, but also Energy and Mines of my country. I never had the challenge to be confronted with the Minister of Energy and Mining. And by the way, I had to deal with many ministers of energy and mining from Latin America, and these people are trained in oil and gas. And this is what they promote. So if on one side you got ministers of environment with the commitment to implement the Paris Agreement and the other multilateral conventions, but at the same time, you got other decision makers dealing with the economic crisis, fiscal deficit, and the debt issues, and the business as usual exploitation of non-renewable natural resources becomes a very attractive way. So I believe that synergies are important, political coherence is important, and the GEF has been able to prepare in the context of the GEF aid replenishment to give countries the opportunity to design projects that aims at the whole convention, the whole Rio Conventions through different sectors. So it aims to work with all the conventions, bringing multiple sectors all together. This, in theory, will give us the possibility to maximize and optimize the GEF resources, multilateral cooperation, bilateral and domestic investment, and at the same time will give us the possibility to generate more political coherence within development policies and the way we assign public resources. Thank you so much, David.
Great. Thank you very much, Carlos Manuel. Political coherence, I think it's a theme I want to bring up. And what I found interesting as you closed your remarks, reminding us that one of the parts of bringing political coherence is the involvement of multiple stakeholders in this, and multiple sectors as well. And that's something that I think we're starting to see under all of the conventions, and we'll talk about it in a minute when we get some remarks from the Executive Secretary to the Convention of Biological Diversity, Elizabeth Mrema. So yes, that question is really important. But Carlos Manuel, you also talked about the question of perverse subsidies, that we are currently spending so many multiples of our nature positive, our biodiversity positive, our land positive investments to destroy the environment. And certainly under the convention, one of the Convention of Biological Diversity, one of the things we'll be looking at is this question of perverse subsidies, and we can talk about it overall. So I'm with apologies to the people who are in the panel here, I'm going to move to a recorded message from my boss, Elizabeth Mrema, who's the Executive Secretary to the Convention on Biological Diversity. So Elizabeth is here in Sharm el-Sheikh, but she's closed up in a room right now with, I think, about 23 ministers of the environment discussing the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, working on moving forward on a deal. And I was there in some of the first parts of it, and this question of policy coherence came forward, and also this question of finance came forward as well. So I'm going to ask the team here to play the video of Elizabeth, of her remarks to the group. Yes, so I have to warn the panelists on the stage, the sound is coming from the TVs, so we will hear it very loudly. I apologize to you, but the rest of you, you'll have to listen carefully. Thanks.
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, let me extend my apologies for not being with you in person today, but I'm not far away. I'm participating in a ministerial discussion convened here in Sharm el-Sheikh by the governments of China and Canada on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, of which I shall speak more later. In 1992, at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, governments agreed on the key international legal instruments to address climate, land degradation, and biodiversity. Even then, it was clear that these issues are intimately linked. The vision was that they would serve as essential instruments to achieve sustainable development safeguard the natural world, and ensure the future of humanity. This vision of coordinated approaches under the Convention on Climate Change, Desertification Convention, and Biodiversity Convention is urgent now more than ever before. As the COVID-19 pandemic has revealed, global emergencies, including environmental crises, recognize no borders, respect no ideologies, and are not restrained by political differences. To address them, multilateralism is the only way forward. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation pose existential threats to humanity. The linkages between them have been clearly established. Our actions to address them must also be linked. There are many ways we can work together to advance the objectives of the Rio Conventions towards a sustainable future for humanity and the planet. For example, actions that restore degraded land and ecosystems strengthen nature and the services it provides to people and our reliance to climate change. Ecosystem-based solutions, sometimes known as nature-based solutions, that protect biodiversity, contribute to climate change mitigation and adaptation, and to food and water security. Mitigation and adaptation to climate change by a variety of efforts, including transitioning away from fossil fuels towards renewables, modifying agriculture and land use practices, can ensure that biodiversity remains rich and healthy and that the land is protected from future degradation. As we prepare for the future meetings of the Conference of the Parties to the 3 Rio Conventions, it will be crucial to work closely together to reinforce positive practices at each stage. The year 2022 has proven to be an important year to create lasting transformation on a global scale. We have had the opportunity to build on the results from the Desertification Convention COP15 and the results expected here at Climate COP27. I want to take few moments to speak about the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework currently under negotiations under the Biodiversity Convention process. This is meant to be a universal framework to take really action on all drivers of biodiversity loss. Its success will therefore depend on the implementation of the objectives of all related international organizations and conventions, including our sister Rio Conventions. Involvement needs to come from all stakeholders and all of society that assemble the processes and in implementation, not just for the Biodiversity Convention, but also Climate Convention and Desertification Convention, from non-governmental organizations to business, from women organizations to youth, including indigenous peoples and local communities, academia and research, and subnational and local governments. The post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework will also require whole-of-government approaches. Therefore, efforts under the 3 Rio Conventions to foster cooperation and coordinated approaches in the implementation of the Rio Conventions at national level will therefore contribute to building such a whole-of-government approaches. We are having this event in the GEF and GCF Pavilion, and I therefore also want to take this opportunity to congratulate the donors for the strong replenishment of the Global Environmental Facility. Resource mobilization from all sources will be an integral part of the implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. For these items, the GEF will play an essential role, and a strong GEF 8 replenishment is essential to the implementation of the first decade of the Global Biodiversity Framework and the realization of the 2030 targets. To all of you at this event, I wish you a strong and productive discussion that will not end here, but will take part of the continuing conversation towards coordinated actions among all Rio Conventions. Thank you and all the best.
Great. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for those remarks. And you'll note again, one of the things she speaks of with regard to policy coherence and indeed synergies is the engagement of all sectors and stakeholders. And through that, we can bring together this conversation. I'm going to turn now, she's at a bit of a time constraint, so I'm going to turn to Her Excellency Miss Teresa Ribera, who's the Deputy Prime Minister for the Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge in Spain. So, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for convening this meeting. It is not the first time that we talk about the synergies and how the different conventions should work together. But I think that we have not yet sufficiently succeeded on how we can produce different outcomes. So I would like to refer first to the comments being made by Ibrahim and Carlos Manuel, because I think that there is something which is absolutely clear in this context. First, I benefit from being the fourth one, so being in a position to support and to say that I stick to every single word that has already been expressed. But there are some reflections that I think can be shared, which are very important. The first of them, I was moved when Ibrahim was saying that it is already 50 years since we got this very important flagship report on the limits of growth. And this is on one hand a kind of a pity, a sad story. We were warned and we were not able to react at the extension and at the deepness that we needed. The mentality of the economy of the cowboy, so no limits, no ends in the horizon, has already been working for a very long while, which is absolutely stupid and anachronic. It doesn't make sense. It's absolutely rational, but it is still the paradigm that we need to dramatically change, and we are almost out of time. We need to run in this transformation. The second thing is that, yes, Carlos Manuel is right. There's one side of the coin talking about synergies and the other side of the coin talking about policy coherence. And maybe human coherence, because it is not just institutions that need to be coherent. We need to think what is the things, what are the type of things that we can do in the different forms of our organizations and our day-to-day life, corporates, associations, cities. We are not very coherent. This is the human factor that sometimes destroys the coherence and the efforts that we make with one hand and we destroy with the other hand. And we see this as a very relevant call. We know that extreme weather events or the low actions but a clear destruction of the climate system that can create and can bring us into a milestone that has not recovery do finally impact on the human being, human welfare, on the biodiversity, on the land degradation, on the climate system. So it is true that the different type of actions do finally impact on every single living being. And I think that this should make us think that we may stress the very strict connection between human being and nature. So affecting and trying to identify what are the social claims, the social understanding on how we can create prosperity or welfare, and to what extent we make this prosperity and welfare when we do not pay attention to the environmental limits, to the ecosystem limits. And we have learned a lot. It's true that 50 years have gone already, and we did not react at the right speed, but we have learned a lot. We have learned that we need to count on people and to put people at the center of the decisions and to put people at the center of the discussion, because well-informed people understanding where the opportunities may be, where the difficulties may be, why it is worth it to make the effort, is much more active understanding that we need policy consistency, understanding that we need a deep change in the understanding of the economy. So people is very important, participation of people and paying attention to the impacts that our decisions may have on people to avoid the negative side effects of our decisions or the distributional impacts that we may create if we do not pay attention. So first comment, people. Second comment, I think that we have also learned that it is absolutely key to count on sound information, science-based decisions, capacity to understand and to project what could be the impacts of acting, not acting, acting this way or not acting in this proper manner is very important. And the climate change action is very much connected to the awareness being set by science and the way we have created a dialogue between science and policymakers. And then we got the IPBES, who also stressed the impact of counting on some basis on biodiversity, so to have proper answers when designing policies or when taking decisions in corporates or when thinking about cities. And I think that this is key, to keep the dialogue and the investment and the understanding and to democratize the access to this information to everybody and every policy maker. This is absolutely key, transforming on the basis of science. And then the other thing that I guess that it is important is to identify concrete milestones, targets along the years, along with different time horizons, because otherwise it is so stressful. The whole global ecosystem and global climate system depending on every single concrete action we take is madness. It is a nightmare. What does this mean? In a human scale, what does this mean? So identifying concrete targets, concrete goals in a concrete time frame is very important, because that provides some dimension that is at the scale of our human capacities. It must be consistent with science, it must be consistent with the different time horizons, it must count on people at the center of our decisions, but we know what we talk. We know what we talk when we talk about the conservation or the restoration or the protection of a certain percentage of our surface or our maritime space. Does this mean that the rest of the space does not need being preserved, conserved, or restored? Probably not. But we fix some ideas that provides hope and provides a line to take. And I think that this is very important. The other thing, and this could be my final remark, and I like it very much, the comments from your boss, the Secretary on Biodiversity, is that something we have also learned is that ecosystems is the answer. At the end, when we focus our action on the preservation, conservation, restoration, before that, understanding the way the ecosystem provides services and why it is worth it to preserve, restore, or conserve, we are playing in a synergic manner on the three conventions. We can get inspiration to provide some solutions on climate impacts and building resilience. We prevent land degradation, and we are inspired on nature, and we are preserving biodiversity. So I think that this notion of nature-based solutions, ecosystems restoration is very key. And it also allows each of us as human beings, as people, reconnecting with nature and understanding why it is worth it to preserve what it is the physical base for our prosperity. And I guess that it may be a little bit too open in the air, but I think that this is the type of things that could be solved by Yasmine in a while. Eh?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you, Your Excellency, so much. Thank you. So to pull out just a couple of things from the talk, so the words I remember from you is it's about people, because we're ultimately about people. But tying back to your last comment, it's about people and their connection to nature and to the ecosystems around you. And I know you said, oh, is this a little bit soft or whatever, but I'm a firm believer in the idea of people connecting with nature and having that connection. But you said it's also about science as well, and it's about a science that provides the basis for our work, but a science that's accessible to everybody, and that's about education, making sure that people are educated to understand science, and that we make sure that that knowledge is really valued. We're in a time that is post-science, people say, but we shouldn't be there, for sure. And then finally, the question of targets, indeed. How do we make sure that we set a pace for ourselves, we set commitments, things that we have to promise to do so that we can structure and organize our work. So thank you very, very much for those remarks. That's excellent. So, so before I go to Mr. Donwahi, I'd like to welcome Her Excellency, the Minister of Environment of Egypt, Yasmine Fouad, who I had the honor of working with her in 2018 at our COP14 right here in Sharm el-Sheikh. So thank you very much. It's good to see you again after so many years. That's great. So we're first going to move to Mr. Donwahi, and then Yasmine, you'll get the chance to have sort of some more remarks afterwards. So first, Mr. Donwahi, the floor is yours.
Merci. Je vais juste dire ces mots en français et puis passer en anglais tout à l'heure. Juste saluer mes compatriotes de Côte d'Ivoire qui sont ici présents et les remercier pour leur présence. I would like to say hi to all our colleagues, ministers, Vice Deputy Prime Minister, Monsieur le Secrétaire exécutif, and say that almost everything has been said. You know, everything has been said. Last week we've noticed that most of the leaders of the world were here in Sharm el-Sheikh. Most of the leaders of all countries in the world, they were here in Sharm el-Sheikh. And all of them recognize that we have an urgency to do something. Urgency to do something for the planet. Urgency to do something to change the way the climate is moving. And everybody recognizes that climate, land degradation, drought, biodiversity are interlinked. Everybody recognizes that. And we have 3 conventions. Since 30 years, since 1992, those 3 conventions are working, each of them along its own way. There's a need to have more coherence and work together with those 3 conventions. Everybody recognizes that. So what do we do? What do we do? So those 3 conventions work together. First of all, the 3 presidencies. We have the intention to make a joint statement, joint declaration. We were supposed to do it a few months ago. We still discuss about it. We were supposed to do it here in Sharm el-Sheikh. We still discuss about it. Hope very soon we are going to have a joint declaration, meaning that those 3 conventions recognize that we have to work together. To make it more concrete, the 3 Secretariat, UNCCD, UNFCCC, and CBD, should work together. I know they have a relationship, but they should work together because they are the 3 pillars to solve our climate problem today. So I would like to see them work together and make design a roadmap, a common and global roadmap for the 3 conventions. Because all those problems that we have in climate, in drought, floods, lack of biodiversity, they are all linked and interlinked. Last week we have noticed also that we have new regional initiatives. We've seen the Middle East Green Initiative and the Saudi Green Initiative, a very good initiative with countries that have the same type of problems and want to work together to solve those problems. So to have a coherent policy altogether to solve the problem of drought, of deserts, of desertification, lack of biodiversity, problems of water, and it's a good thing. Another initiative was brought by the President of Senegal and the President of the government of Spain, IDRA, which is conducted by UNCCD. It is a good initiative because it will lead us to have coherent policies and actions to solve the problem of drought. But solving the problem of drought or land degradation will solve the problem of climate change and solve the problem of biodiversity loss. Other initiatives such as the Great Green Wall initiative in Africa, from Mauritania, Senegal to Djibouti, helping moving forward to implement this initiative will solve a lot of problems around the world with this Great Green Wall. So we're seeing that regional and inter-regional initiatives need to be implemented around the world, in Asia and South America, in Europe, Australia, all over the world. This will help have coherent initiative, coherent policies around the world, and have implementation really done. We talked also about the people. The people. In a lot of countries, I've seen that the people are not aware, really, are not aware of the problems of food security created by climate change, food security created by food insecurity, I would say, created by droughts, and they are not involved in the decisions. They are not involved in the actions. In my country, in Côte d'Ivoire, we've tried with the new forest policy to go to educate the new generations. We need to educate the new generation so they have a different set of mind, different mindset towards the preservation of the environment. But the population needs more sensitization to be aware of really the risk that the planet goes to, you know. So sensitization, information, education needs to be done. And also, now we talked also about policies. Okay. Coherent policies. In some countries, you have, it's not like in Costa Rica. Carlos Manuel said he had around 5 different ministerial departments: energy, forest, water. What did you have? Land, mining. Yeah, water, mining. One ministry. So there is a coherent policy. In my country, we had 5. Forest was on one side, environment on the other side, mining was another ministry, la pêche, fishery was another ministry. So how do they talk together? Are they talking together? When? Do they have a platform to talk together to have a similar, coherent policy? Do they talk to other countries? Because droughts doesn't have a frontier between Côte d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso, or between Niger and Mali. So we need to have coherent policies. So the leaders, after they have done all the talking here, after they do all the talking in COPs, what do they do really to have those countries talk together and understand that we have to work together? It's not really interesting to see, to come to a COP and you have some countries saying that they are not polluting and the others are polluting, and they don't talk together. They don't solve the problem together. It's not a fight against each other. We have to work all together. It's important. So I don't want to talk too much, but I insist on the political commitment. Political commitment is important. It's not only talk, but in reality, we need to move on. And I think the Secretariat of UNCCD, UNCCC, and CBD can be a good tool for us, for countries, to have a common platform to move on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Well, I feel in some ways you've raised a challenge, a good challenge to all of us, saying that how do we concretely move forward with plans that can bring us together, ways that we can really get this true political commitment. So I think as we all should reflect on how we move forward on this. It was also interesting to hear you talk about a lot of these regional platforms that can become one example of how this coherence can be generated, not just at national level, but much further. And I think these are interesting projects, and that regional collaboration can become something that can be scaled up in a bigger sense. And then your lessons when you're looking at, Carlos Manuel's experience versus your experience in terms of how the ministries work together or don't work together. We can hear about that from Minister Fouad as well. What is the difference and how can we bring those ministries together? And then I was also struck by your comment about people, involving the people, sensitizing them, education and knowledge so that they are part of this whole commitment. And it seems to me this reflects on some of the other comments that this coherence comes when the citizens and the sectors and the stakeholders are all involved and active, and they can communicate with each other as well. So it's not just about us getting here on a stage and talking about commitments, it's something that they live and experience very much at their level. So thank you very, very much. So now we're going to turn to Minister Fouad, who's worked in the biodiversity sphere and is now helping us tomorrow with Biodiversity Day at COP27 as well. Minister Fouad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for the UNCCD, and my dear friend Carlos, Ibrahim. A pleasure to be with you in this panel. But let me be a bit bold in what I'm going to say now, because you're not going to like that, although those are my cameras, so I'll be able to delete whatever I want to delete. I served as a president for the CBD for 3 years, and there were the most difficult 3 years for the history of the global conventions, because that was the pandemic. We faced so many challenges on continuing on the process. The responsibility that was given to Egypt at that time is to draw the draft post-2020 biodiversity framework, and getting the people via Zoom virtually was not easy. The regular, that kind of differences between the global south and the global north and so forth. And this was really a lot and hectic. In CBD in 2018, in this very same city, our president has called forth the synergetic approach between the biodiversity, land degradation, and climate change. And the purpose for that was that those conventions, for those who has been working in that area for quite a long time, were born together in 1992. And they laid the foundation for achieving the sustainable development processes at the regional and at the national level. And because us as international community decided to de-link them, going to the climate context, to the biodiversity context, and to the land degradation context, and start complaining why we're not doing progress. We're not doing progress because simply we de-link the same thing that we decided to link once in a lifetime. This is one thing. And when we called for that synergetic approach, we were that was before Carlos came and took over. That was Nawaka at that time. And we wanted the GEF as the financial mechanism for the convention to support that approach. And we felt that that was the right context to start working on bringing them together. We had hopes that the 3 executive secretaries would be able to work together and provide some guidance to the process, at least a global response for the interlinkages between the most drastic global environmental challenges that is really threatening our humanity on Earth. It's nothing more than this. Our Earth is being threatened. but nothing has moved from that direction up till now. So now, in the climate conference, we insisted to have a day on biodiversity. And the reason why we wanted that day is to give ourselves a better chance from COP27 to COP15 to start doing something actual implementation on the ground. And when I'm talking about climate and biodiversity, land is not out of that, because land is part of the biodiversity, and I was chasing Ibrahim, meaning chasing when he was the interim part of the climate, to ensure that land is there. And the reason why we're doing that is that we can accelerate our actions towards the planet if we just think pretty good on how this can happen at the global response. First, we need a robust, ambitious, transformative, institutional setup at the global response that links to that urgently, efficiently, and effectively. That's number one. Number two, the GEF has now the biggest replenishment. It's the 5.3 billion that you were able to mobilize, the 5.3 billion that can demonstrate that kind of interlinkage and can still do a lot in that regard, because we don't have sufficient financial resources. And the last thing we would like to go and say, the land degradation needs that amount of money, and the biodiversity, God knows on the post framework how we would land there in Montreal, and the climate, you know, the big elephant in the room is the 100 billion that comes in each of the COPs. So we don't want to get ourselves trapped in the same mistake again. But doing that synergy would mean doing that kind of efficient use of resources. And a very good example of that, it's not only the GEF. I had that discussion with the GCF that they have a pretty good component since it was first established on the ecosystem-based approach and ecosystem services, which gives a unique opportunity for the private sector investment in that part of the linkage between climate change, land degradation, and biodiversity, but there is a very little portfolio on that. Last but not least, what we see is that it's not about a statement that would come out of the climate COP or the biodiversity COP. It's about the action for the people. The good start would be moving from Sharm el-Sheikh with a strong implementation agenda from the biodiversity. This is what I'm trying to do tomorrow. I'm trying to bring that initiative of the nature-based solution for the people and by the people at the heart of the Biodiversity Day. And I know it's very risky, by the way, because I worked on both fronts. I worked on the biodiversity and the climate, and the biodiversity family is completely different than the climate family. So trust me that linking them together is very difficult. But still, there is hope that we can do that, go confidently to COP15, start implementing, collect the success story. The GEF has that 5.3 billion that would support that part of the linkages. Bring the success story, let's replicate and upscale, and we will be doing an immense work within a year or two that we should be doing in 10 years if we just put our heads hard and start actual implementation of linkage and not only global statements. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a day of everyone doing bold statements.
Did you know why the COP president has asked me to give the speech on his behalf? That invitation was given to Minister Shukri.
Yeah.
So I told him I'm going there, but not on behalf of the COP president, because I have to say what I want to say.
Well, I feel very, very lucky that we've got this strong biodiversity voice here, and that you've survived these 3 years of the pandemic to still have this energy moving forward. So I know that we've lost a couple of our panelists, but I'm struck that what I got from a lot of the panelists here was this sense that, you know, I use the word, they were delinked. We had the opportunity at the beginning when we first had these discussions, and they were delinked, and now there's the energy to come back together. But there is the challenge I'm hearing from you. I mean, Mr. Donwahi talked a bit of a challenge as well, but your challenge, I think, cuts to the heart of it, which is that we can have a statement or des paroles, the words here, but where is the action, and where is that moving forward? And that's the really key sort of thing. So we've gone through a lot of time, but I still want to have a little bit of talk, and I'm maybe going to work over here. So Carlos Manuel, I'm going to turn it to you. So you've got this GEF replenishment now. But now I'm going to ask you to already think about the next one, right? So you've already got the money now and you haven't spent it, but you need to get it and provide it to support all of the synergies. So once you've done that, how are you investing for the next replenishment where we take the synergy even further?
Well, thanks, David. I do have my mind in GEF 9, my eyes on GEF 8, and my hands on GEF 7, which is being implemented at this point. And I think that this is extremely, extremely important because we all need to recognize that within the conventions, we have lost the innocence of the early days. You know, working based on conventions, working on even the Rio markers, and now we're heading into more complement, and that means giving the countries more flexibilities on how they use the GEF resources, and this is extremely, extremely critical and important. Last year at the Climate COP, for the first time, being a CBD negotiator myself and a climate negotiator myself, last time in Glasgow, I had this kind of identity crisis because I didn't know if I were in a CBD or in a climate COP, which was a great news. And the same thing happened early this year in Abidjan, where we all came together and kind of closed a circle that to me began in Glasgow, went into Abidjan, and now we're here in Sharm el-Sheikh once more. So the GEF is prepared to provide the flexibilities and the support for more integration in the way that countries use their resources, as we all recognize that we need to think across conventions and work across sectors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carlos Manuel. Flexibility, I think that's the one thing we're all talking about, is the flexibility. Everyone has the roles, but how does everything work and continue to move together in that flexible way and move things forward? So, so Ibrahim, again, for you, so we're talking about the synergies and the way forward. So within the CCD process, as we look forward to the next COP, what are the steps that we can take or move that are going to be not, you know, that are going to be both multilateralism that will support synergies, but as well as how you're going to realize it on the ground with the parties to the CCD?
Thank you, David. It's great to have you, Minister Yasmine Fouad, and thank you for the energy and the vibrant call. We need more ministers like you, and we need more countries that are convinced about the synergies, because it is a decision by parties, not by the secretariats. And what we need is probably presidencies of COP, but also slowly moving to COP decisions, because that's the reality. As executive secretaries, I can assure you that we work very closely together. Actually, in fact, we are three friends, to tell you the truth. Our secretariats are working together. What is lacking is implementation on the ground. Secretariats are not implementing. So what is lacking is a real, at the national level, a proper planning. And what is lacking is incentivizing the synergies that I talked about earlier. Both Carlos Manuel and yourself were not in the room when I was speaking, because financial mechanism can be very good incentives for that synergy that we are talking about. And then thirdly, what is lacking is regional cooperation. President Donwahi spoke about regional initiatives like, you know, the Middle East Green Initiative or the Great Green Wall and so forth. So at the level of these regional initiatives, it is very important to keep in mind the synergetic approach that we are talking about. It is possible, but it is possible through vision that you have, and I'm very happy that you have now the COP presidency of the climate. We have the COP presidency of the UNCCD, and we will have soon a very engaged COP presidency of the CBD. I mean, China is always engaged, and certainly after the second part of the COP, in Montreal next month, we will have again, they will have probably more freedom to actually come to these conversations. But even COP presidencies have a limited role to play there unless their own COPs provided with the guidance, because they are COP presidents, they cannot direct, they cannot make decisions on behalf of COPs. So we are dealing here with a very complex process. Now, that is from the institutional point of view. From the program point of view, it can happen, and it only happens at the national level. There is no substitute to national level, because we are dealing with sovereignty, we are dealing with sovereign nations that have their conventions and that would like to develop their programs. But the incentives are the GCF, the GEF, and the MDPs. I'm just repeating myself, but I think these are very important points.
Ibrahim, I just want to comment on that. I'm sorry that you are the moderator, but I need to get
you have
in
the energy.
that.
Go ahead, go ahead.
It's true that it comes from the national level and the national planning process, but now we have a very unique opportunity, and this is what I'm talking about. That still good part of the NDCs, let's take it from the climate angle, the one that's more attractive, has that component on the biodiversity and the land as part of the NDC under the adaptation component, especially for our continent, for Africa. Secondly, if there is a mechanism within the GEF, and I know that could be eligible, to have something that would attract those countries to develop projects that would support the implementation on the ground, tackling the linkages with the focus on the people at the heart of that, I think that would create that kind of appetite. But if we go back to the countries when we are in the era of action and implementation requests, mainstreaming within the national planning, let us look at the three, how they can connect together. We're not doing any good, but attracting them by finance from the climate angle, from the NDC, putting that kind of criteria that would link, that could help a lot. As for the parties to the convention and COP presidencies at the level of the climate, land degradation, and biodiversity, I think this could be doable within the next CBD COP15, or even beyond that, with a call from the Secretary General on doing that kind of synergetic approach, because I really believe it can help a lot in shortening our way in saving the planet. Thank you. You have the moderation now.
No, but I appreciate it. It's good when the panel has so much energy to bring forward. Thank you. So we've got a challenge there to Carlos Manuel to look at some of those ways that we can bring people into the process as well, and then talking about the presidencies, the possibilities that we have moving forward. Mr. Donwahi, you haven't had a chance yet to weigh in terms of moving forward on this agenda. You speak both as a COP president, but also at the national level. So some final comments about you, about the way forward in the next little while for this agenda.
I think the way forward has been shown by Minister Fouad. You know, less talk, more act, more action. If we leave the countries by themselves, only at the national level, we'll have a problem. Really, we'll have a problem. We need to be able to bring them together. We have the chance today that two of the COPs are held by Africans, African countries, Côte d'Ivoire and Egypt. And we are able to make it move, I think. Because we have no choice anyway. Because we are the African continent is the continent that is the most affected by climate change. So things need to be moved, needs to change, you know. And even if Ibrahim said that he is not on the implementation level, but I think the Secretariat can help us, you know, can help the countries to implement. And they need to move on. You know, they cannot sit there and do nothing. They have to do something. you know, because the synergy that they have today will help all the countries to have common synergies, you know. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We're getting near the end of the time here, so I'm going to just have a few remarks, but also if any panelists have one more thing, the energy like Yasmine Fouad had just a minute ago as well. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing that, you know, with the people and the institutions represented here, we have the tools at our disposal. I mean, we've got a new flexibility in financial mechanisms. We've got a new vision for the way the projects can be implemented in a way that can deal with this agenda of bringing together stakeholders in different sectors in these projects in common. And you know, we got the experience, you know, Carlos Manuel working with Costa Rica found a way that you could bring together so many sectors under one ministry to make it happen as well. That's one model, but with the other models that we can look at is how can we get other sectors coming together. So I think that's important. As someone who works within the multilateral process and someone who's come to climate COPs for years, I'm so excited to see this chain from Glasgow to here in the climate process where nature and land degradation is coming really right to the forefront. And that's very exciting. And I'm glad to see the initiatives we're seeing from Egypt and hoping that we'll see it as we move forward next year as well in that process. And we want to see that same sort of thing in the UNCCD. So I'd like to thank all of the panelists for joining us today. I know you're exceedingly busy, and I love all of your passionate stories. You've all come from different directions, and I've had a chance to work with you in different ways. So thank you so much. My last little pitch for the audience is I'd like to remind you that tomorrow is Biodiversity Day. It's an entire day of activities that'll talk about bringing them together. So here's the pitch as well. That's why Yasmine is looking so tired, because she's done so much stuff for that. I want to remind you. But I also want to remind you that here in the GEF Pavilion on the 17th, we're going to have another Rio Conventions Pavilion event about the Great Green Wall. And I personally have been so inspired when I see the Great Green Wall stories. I went to Great Green Wall Day in COP15 in Abidjan, and it was very inspiring. So I implore you to come here to that event as well to look at that. And here's an example of working across countries to deal with land, climate, biodiversity issues together. So thank you everyone for your time. Thank you to the panelists for your time. And thank you everyone to your energy and commitment as we move forward. Have a good day.